It was late September 2021, a humid evening in Fort Worth. I just finished watering the succulents by my kitchen window when the kettle began to whistle. My son Evan was making tea again, the third night in a row. He'd been so helpful since moving back home. "You should rest more, Mom," he'd said earlier that week, his voice gentle, concerned. I remember thinking how lucky I was to have him back. After 2 years alone in this house, after Richard's passing, the silence had become its own kind of weight. But that night, as I took the first sip of peppermint tea Evan handed me, something felt different. The taste was slightly bitter, almost metallic. I mentioned it. "It's the organic blend," he explained quickly. "Takes getting used to." I trusted him. Why wouldn't I? He was my son. The boy I'd raised, the man I'd seen struggle and grow. But by November, I couldn't remember my doctor's appointments. By December, I found a life insurance policy in my name, $2 million, with Evan as the sole beneficiary. A policy I never signed. That's when I stopped drinking the tea he made. And that's when everything became clear. Let me tell you what happens when a mother realizes her own child has been slowly poisoning her. Let me tell you how I survived. Let me tell you how silence became my weapon and patience became my shield. Sarah Callan had been a nurse for 32 years before retiring. She understood the human body the way a mechanic understands an engine. Every sound, every irregularity, every symptom had meaning. She'd worked in intensive care for 15 of those years, learning to read monitors before they alarmed, to notice the subtle changes in a patient's color or breathing that signaled trouble hours before it became critical. At 54, she still kept her nursing textbooks on the shelf above the kitchen table, still subscribed to medical journals that arrived monthly in plain brown envelopes, still noticed when something in her own body didn't align with what it should. The house in Fort Worth was modest but well kept. 3 bedrooms, a small yard with native grasses and drought-resistant plants carefully chosen to survive the brutal Texas summers, a covered porch where she'd spent countless evenings with her late husband Richard, drinking iced tea and watching the neighbors walk their dogs as the sun set behind the houses across the street. Richard had died 2 years earlier, a heart attack, sudden and merciless, on a Tuesday morning while he was mowing the lawn, and Sarah had learned to live alone. She didn't mind the quiet. She'd grown up in it, in a small town west of Abilene where silence was the default setting and people measured their words carefully before speaking them, where saying too much was considered a character flaw. Her son Evan was 29, tall and lean like his father, with dark hair that he kept short and eyes that had always seemed to be calculating something just beyond the immediate moment. He'd been a thoughtful child, quiet, observant, the kind of boy who watched other children play rather than joining them. In high school, he excelled in mathematics and economics, graduating third in his class. He'd moved to Houston 5 years earlier, taking a job at an insurance firm, climbing the ladder slowly but steadily through a combination of competence and careful networking. Sarah had been proud. He called every Sunday at exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon, visited on holidays, sent flowers on Mother's Day with cards that read "To the best mom" in his neat, careful handwriting. He was a good son. Or so she'd thought. It was early June 2021 when Evan called on a Tuesday afternoon, his voice different, thinner, somehow, like paper stretched too tight over a frame that couldn't quite support it. "Mom, I need to come home for a while." Sarah had been folding laundry in the living room, the phone wedged between her shoulder and ear, her hands smoothing wrinkles from a pillowcase. The television was on low, playing a cooking show she wasn't watching. "What happened?" "Lost my job. Company downsized. They let go of 12 people in my department. I just need some time to figure things out." There was no hesitation in her response. She didn't ask if he was sure, didn't suggest alternatives, didn't wonder about the timing. "Of course. Your room's still here. It's always here." He arrived 3 days later in a Honda Civic that looked like it needed an oil change, packed with 2 duffel bags, a laptop case, and a cardboard box labeled "Important Documents" in black marker. Sarah stood on the porch and watched him park at the curb, watched him step out with that familiar half-smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, watched him walk toward her with his hands in his pockets, shoulders slightly hunched against a wind that wasn't blowing. "Thanks, Mom." She hugged him, feeling the thinness of his frame beneath the t-shirt, the sharp edges of his shoulder blades. He'd always been slim, but this felt different. "You've lost weight. Been stressed. We'll fix that. I'll make lasagna tonight." They carried his things inside. The house smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and the lavender sachet she kept in the hallway closet, mixing with the warm air that pressed in through the open windows. Evan's old room looked exactly as he'd left it when he'd moved to Houston, twin bed with a blue comforter that was starting to fade, desk by the window where he'd done homework in high school, posters from bands he'd liked tacked to the walls with yellowing tape. He set his bags down carefully, as if they contained something fragile, and looked around. "Feels like stepping back in time." "Time doesn't move fast here," Sarah said, leaning against the doorframe. "Sometimes I think it stopped when your father died." Evan turned to look at her. "Are you doing okay, Mom?" "Really? I'm fine. Better now that you're here." And in that moment, she meant it. That first week was easy. Evan slept late, until 9 or 10 in the morning, and spent hours on his laptop at the kitchen table sending out resumes, filling out applications, and networking on LinkedIn. He helped with small tasks around the house without being asked. He fixed the loose board on the back porch that Sarah had been meaning to repair for months, replaced the batteries in all 3 smoke detectors, mowed the lawn on a Thursday morning before the heat became unbearable, trimmed the hedges along the driveway. Sarah felt useful again. The house no longer felt like a museum of her past life with Richard, a place where she was just a curator moving through rooms filled with memories. It felt inhabited. It felt like a home. On the 8th day, Evan installed a new Wi-Fi router. "The old one's too slow," he explained, standing on a chair in the living room, running cables behind the entertainment center with practiced efficiency. "This one's faster. Better for job applications and video interviews." Sarah didn't think much of it. Technology wasn't her strength. She'd learned to use email and Google, could navigate Facebook well enough to see photos of her friends' grandchildren, but anything beyond that felt like a foreign language spoken too quickly to follow. Evan handled the setup, wrote down the new password on a post-it note in his careful handwriting, stuck it to the refrigerator door with a magnet shaped like Texas. "All set. You shouldn't notice any difference, but everything will load faster." "Thank you, sweetheart." He smiled, that same half-smile, and returned to his room, closing the door softly behind him. By the second week, Sarah noticed Evan had developed a routine that felt both helpful and somehow intrusive, though she couldn't articulate why. He woke before her, always by 7:30, made coffee in the automatic maker she'd had for years, and collected the mail from the box at the end of the driveway before she'd even finished her first cup. When she came downstairs, usually around 8, he'd hand her the relevant pieces, bills that needed attention, subscription renewals for magazines she'd forgotten she'd subscribed to, occasional letters from friends she'd worked with at the hospital who'd since moved away. Everything else he handled himself, keeping it in a small pile by his laptop that grew throughout the week before he'd take it all to the recycling bin on trash day. "Just junk mail," he'd say whenever she glanced at the pile. "Credit card offers, grocery store flyers, that kind of thing. I'll recycle it." She didn't question it. He was helping. He was taking initiative. It was what she'd always wanted for him, to be responsible, proactive, engaged with the world instead of passive and waiting for things to happen to him. But then the tea started. It was mid-June, a hot evening with temperatures still hovering near 95 degrees even though the sun had set an hour earlier, cicadas droning in the mesquite trees outside in their relentless summer rhythm. Sarah had just finished washing dishes, her hands wrinkled from the hot water, when Evan appeared in the kitchen doorway with a small white box tied with brown twine. "Got you something." She dried her hands on a towel, turned to face him. "What is it?" "Organic tea. Peppermint and chamomile blend. Supposed to help with sleep and relaxation." Sarah took the box, turned it over in her hands. The label was handwritten in neat script on cream-colored paper: relaxation blend, organic herbs, peppermint, chamomile, Valerian root, no brand name, no barcode, no ingredient list beyond the description. It looked homemade, artisanal, the kind of thing sold at farmers' markets by women wearing long skirts and talking about the healing properties of plants. Where'd you get this? Farmers market downtown. There's a lady who sells herbs and teas. She said this one's popular with retirees who have trouble sleeping. Sarah laughed softly. Retirees. That's what I am now, isn't it? You know what I mean. People our age. You're 29. People your age. Then he smiled. I thought it might help. You've been tossing and turning at night. I can hear it through the wall. Sarah hadn't realized he could hear her. The walls were thin, she knew that, but she'd thought she was quieter in her insomnia. I didn't know I was keeping you awake. You're not. I just worry about you. That night, Evan made her a cup. He boiled water in the old kettle that whistled when it was ready, measured the loose leaves into a metal infuser shaped like a teapot, let it steep for exactly 5 minutes while checking the timer on his phone, then brought it to her on the couch where she was reading a mystery novel about a detective in Scotland. The cup was warm in her hands, the steam rising with a faint floral scent that reminded her of spring gardens. Try it. She sipped. It tasted clean, slightly sweet, with an earthy undertone that wasn't unpleasant. It's good. Thank you. Told you. The lady at the market knows her stuff. He sat beside her on the couch, picking up the remote control and turning on the television, flipping through channels until he found a cooking show where a cheerful man was making pasta from scratch. They watched in comfortable silence, Sarah drinking the tea slowly, feeling a gentle warmth spread through her chest and down into her limbs. It was pleasant, almost luxurious, this feeling of relaxation without effort. By the time the cup was empty, she felt drowsy, not unpleasantly so, just a soft heaviness in her limbs, a loosening of the tension she'd been carrying in her shoulders since Richard died. I think I'll head to bed, she said, standing carefully because her legs felt slightly unsteady. Sleep well, Mom. She did. She slept deeply, dreamlessly, and woke the next morning later than usual, almost 9 o'clock, the sunlight already harsh and white against the blinds. Her head felt thick, cottony, her thoughts slow to form and slower to connect. She attributed it to age, to the lingering grief she still carried for Richard like a weight in her chest, to the oppressive heat that made everything feel heavier. Evan was already up, sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop open and a mug of coffee beside him, steam rising in a thin column. Morning. Morning, Sarah replied, her voice rough and dry. She poured herself coffee, added cream from the refrigerator, leaned against the counter. I slept hard last night. The tea works then. It does. I don't remember waking up once. That's good. You needed the rest. And so it became routine, as routines do when they're repeated with consistency and presented as care. Every evening, around 9 o'clock, Evan would make her tea. He'd bring it to her wherever she was, on the couch reading or watching television, at the dining table sorting through old photographs and organizing them into albums she'd been meaning to create for years, on the porch watching the sky fade from orange to indigo to black. She'd drink it, feel the pleasant drowsiness, and go to bed. She began sleeping 10 hours a night, sometimes 11, waking late and groggy. Her mornings were sluggish, her thoughts foggy until noon. Her afternoons improved, energy returning in small increments, but by evening she was ready for the tea again, ready for the softness it brought, the way it smoothed the edges of everything. By early July, Sarah noticed she was forgetting small things. She'd write a grocery list on the notepad she kept by the refrigerator, but when she went to the store the list would be gone, and she'd have to recreate it from memory, inevitably forgetting items. She'd start to make a phone call to confirm a dentist appointment and forget who she meant to dial before she'd finished entering the number. She'd walk into a room with a specific purpose, to get scissors from the desk drawer, to water the plant on the windowsill, and stand there for a moment, completely blank, unable to remember why she'd come. Once, she left the stove on after boiling water for pasta and only realized it when Evan came home from a job interview 2 hours later and smelled the faint scent of gas where the flame had blown out. "Mom, you okay?" She turned off the burner quickly, embarrassed and frightened. I forgot. I don't know how, but I forgot. It happens. You're under stress. I've never done anything like that before. There's a first time for everything. Don't worry about it. Just be more careful. But it kept happening. She missed a dentist appointment because she'd written it down wrong in her planner, Wednesday instead of Tuesday, 3 o'clock instead of 2. She couldn't remember the name of her next-door neighbor on the left side, a woman she'd known for 15 years, and had to pretend she did when they ran into each other at the mailbox. She spilled a glass of water and watched it spread across the kitchen table, momentarily unable to recall where the towels were kept, her mind completely blank until Evan appeared and cleaned it up for her. Evan became more attentive. He'd check on her throughout the day, ask if she'd eaten lunch, remind her to take her vitamins, make sure she drank enough water in the brutal heat. He started handling more of the household tasks, paying bills online using her bank account that he had access to as a backup, scheduling maintenance appointments for the air conditioner that was making strange sounds, ordering groceries online and having them delivered so she didn't have to drive in her confused state, as he called it. Sarah felt grateful but also faintly uneasy, a sensation she couldn't quite name. It was like wearing shoes that almost fit but pinched in places you couldn't see, creating discomfort you couldn't explain. One evening in late July, she found an unfamiliar bottle in the bathroom cabinet. It was small, amber-colored glass with a white plastic cap, no label. She picked it up, shook it gently. Pills rattled inside, maybe 20 or 30 of them, based on the sound. Evan, she called, her voice echoing slightly in the small bathroom. He appeared in the doorway within seconds, as if he'd been waiting just outside. Yeah. She held up the bottle. What's this? He glanced at it, then back at her face, his expression neutral and unsurprised. Multivitamins. Got them at the health food store downtown. There's no label. They're bulk. You buy them loose and pour them into your own container. It's cheaper that way and better for the environment. Less plastic waste. Sarah unscrewed the cap, looked inside at the pills. They were small, round, white, completely uniform. They didn't look like any multivitamins she'd seen before. Those were usually larger, oddly shaped, sometimes with visible seams where the capsule halves joined. These looked pharmaceutical. What brand? I don't remember. Some organic company the clerk recommended. He was still standing in the doorway, not moving closer, not offering to take the bottle from her hand. She closed the bottle and put it back on the shelf, sliding it behind the dental floss and contact lens solution. Okay, you should take them. Good for energy and the immune system. Maybe, but something about the exchange felt wrong. The ease of his answer, delivered without hesitation or elaboration. The way he didn't move closer to look at what she was holding, as if he already knew exactly what the bottle contained. The absence of surprise or curiosity about why she was asking. August arrived with temperatures consistently over 100 degrees, the kind of heat that made the air shimmer above the pavement and kept everyone indoors during the middle of the day. Sarah spent most of her time in the house, the air conditioning running constantly with a low hum that became the soundtrack to her days, the curtains drawn to keep out the brutal sunlight. Her energy continued to decline week by week. She napped in the afternoons, sleeping for 2 or 3 hours in her bedroom with the fan on high, and woke groggy and disoriented, unsure what time it was or whether she'd slept for minutes or hours. Her appetite diminished until food seemed more like an obligation than a pleasure. She lost weight, 7 pounds in 3 weeks according to the scale in her bathroom, and her clothes began to hang loose on her frame, requiring her to cinch her belt tighter. Evan suggested she see a doctor. Maybe it's menopause, he said gently one evening while they were eating dinner, chicken and rice that Sarah had barely touched. Or thyroid issues. A lot of women your age develop those. Women my age, Sarah repeated, something sharp in her tone despite her fatigue. You know what I mean. It's worth getting checked out. Sarah agreed because she was worried too. She made an appointment with her primary physician, Dr. Batha, for late August. She wrote it down in 3 places: her planner, the calendar on the wall, a sticky note on her bathroom mirror. But the morning of the appointment, she woke with no memory of it. She went through her usual slow morning routine: shower, coffee, toast she didn't finish, and it wasn't until noon that Evan reminded her. "Mom, you missed your appointment." She stared at him from her position on the couch, confusion clouding her thoughts like fog over water. "What appointment?" "Dr. Mbatha. It was at 9 this morning." Sarah felt a cold shame settle in her chest, heavy and uncomfortable. She'd never missed a doctor's appointment in her life. She was the person who arrived 15 minutes early, who brought her insurance card and a list of questions. "I forgot." "It's okay. These things happen. I'll call and reschedule for you." "No, I can do it." "Mom, you're tired. Let me handle it." He did. He called the office while Sarah sat on the couch, listening to his side of the conversation, hearing him explain that his mother had memory issues and confusion, words that made her sound incapable, diminished. He rescheduled for mid-September, wrote it in large letters on the calendar hanging by the refrigerator, and circled it in red marker. Sarah looked at it every day after that, trying to commit the date to memory, repeating it to herself like a mantra: September 15th at 9 o'clock, but each time she looked away, the date seemed to slip from her mind like water through a sieve, leaving behind only the vague sense that there was something she needed to remember. September came, and with its slightly cooler temperatures, low 90s instead of triple digits, a relief so profound that people ventured outside again in the evenings. But Sarah's memory continued to falter, growing worse instead of better. She began keeping a notebook, a spiral-bound pad she'd found in a kitchen drawer, writing down tasks she needed to complete, appointments she needed to keep, thoughts she wanted to remember. But the act of writing exhausted her, and often she'd forget to check the notebook, finding it days later beneath a stack of mail or tucked into a kitchen drawer she'd opened for an entirely different reason. Evan took over the mail completely by mid-September. He'd bring her only the pieces addressed specifically to her in handwriting she recognized: catalogs from clothing companies she'd ordered from years ago, donation requests from charities she'd supported over the years with small checks. Everything else he handled without consulting her. Bills were paid on time, always on time. The mortgage, the utilities, the insurance premiums for the house and car. Sarah felt relieved. She trusted him. He was organized, capable, responsible in ways she no longer felt she could be. One evening in mid-September, Evan mentioned he'd applied for a job in Dallas. "It's a management position," he said, scrolling through something on his phone while they sat in the living room. "Insurance company, bigger than my old firm. Good pay, full benefits." Sarah's heart sank slightly. She'd grown used to having him in the house, grown dependent on his help in ways that frightened her when she thought about them too closely. "When would you start?" "If I get it, it will probably be in November. Maybe sooner if they need someone right away." "That's soon." He looked up from his phone, met her eyes. "I can stay longer if you need me to. The job will wait." "No," she said quickly, not wanting to be a burden, not wanting to be the kind of mother who held her child back. "You should go. You have your own life to live." "Are you sure?" "I worry about you being alone." "I'll be fine. I managed before you came." But even as she said it, she wasn't sure it was true. Part of her dreaded being alone again. The house would return to its former silence, and she'd have to manage everything herself: the bills she could barely remember to pay, the groceries she forgot to buy, the repairs that needed attention. She wasn't sure she could. Her mind felt unreliable, her body weak, her sense of self eroding bit by bit like a shoreline in a storm. That night, Evan made her tea as usual. She drank it without question, felt the familiar heaviness settle into her limbs, went to bed. But as she lay in the dark, waiting for sleep to take her, a thought surfaced, faint but persistent, like a voice calling from far away. When did this start? She tried to remember through the fog. The fatigue, the confusion, the memory lapses. They'd begun in June. Right after Evan moved in. Right after the tea started. No. She pushed the thought away with effort, burying it beneath rationalizations. It was a coincidence. Stress from having someone in the house again after 2 years alone. Grief that she hadn't properly processed. Age catching up with her in ways she hadn't anticipated. It wasn't tea. It couldn't be the tea. It wasn't Evan. Not her son. Not the boy she'd raised. But the thought wouldn't leave entirely. It remained at the edges of her consciousness, waiting. By late September, Sarah had developed a constant low-grade headache. It sat behind her eyes, dull and persistent like a weight pressing forward, worsening in the mornings when she first woke. She took ibuprofen from the bottle in the bathroom cabinet, drank more water thinking she might be dehydrated, and tried to sleep it off during her afternoon naps. Nothing helped. The pain remained, sometimes fading to a background ache she could almost ignore, sometimes intensifying until she had to lie down in a dark room with a cold washcloth over her forehead. One afternoon, while Evan was out running errands, a job interview, he'd said, though Sarah had stopped tracking which companies he was talking to, she went through the medicine cabinet again. She moved slowly, carefully, taking inventory of everything on the shelves. Toothpaste, dental floss, contact lens solution, bandages, antibiotic ointment. And there, tucked behind the mouthwash, was the unlabeled amber bottle. She took it down, opened it, and poured one of the pills into her palm. It was small, round, white, with a faint line scored down the middle for easy splitting. She'd seen pills like this before, thousands of them, in her years working hospital floors, administering medications, checking dosages, verifying orders. She recognized the general type even without specific identification. She went to her bedroom, retrieved an old nursing reference guide from the bookshelf where it had sat undisturbed for 2 years, and flipped to the section on medications. She compared the physical description of the pill to entries in the book, cross-referencing size, color, shape, scoring pattern. It matched a common benzodiazepine, a sedative. The kind prescribed for anxiety or severe insomnia. The kind that, taken regularly, would cause exactly the symptoms she'd been experiencing: drowsiness, confusion, memory impairment, difficulty concentrating. Sarah's hands began to shake. She closed the book carefully, returned it to the shelf with the spine aligned exactly as it had been, and sat on the edge of her bed. Her mind raced, trying to piece together explanations that made sense, that didn't lead to the terrible conclusion waiting at the end of this trail of evidence. Maybe Evan was taking them for anxiety about his job situation. Maybe he'd bought them without a prescription from someone he knew and didn't want to worry her. Maybe they'd been left behind by a previous owner of the house, forgotten in the back of the cabinet for years. But none of those explanations felt right. None of them explained why the bottle was hidden behind other items. None of them explained the timing, the symptoms starting exactly when the tea started. None of them explained the progressive worsening of her condition. She put the pill back in the bottle, returned it to the cabinet exactly as she'd found it, and went downstairs. Her heart pounded hard enough that she could feel it in her throat. Her mouth was dry despite the water she'd been drinking all day. She poured a glass from the tap, drank it slowly, staring out the kitchen window at the empty street where nothing moved in the afternoon heat. That evening, Evan made tea as usual. Sarah watched him from the living room, her body positioned so she could see into the kitchen through the doorway. He moved with familiar efficiency that looked practiced, rehearsed, boiling water in the kettle, measuring leaves from the white box into the metal infuser, setting the timer on his phone for exactly 5 minutes. But this time, she noticed something she hadn't before, or perhaps had noticed, but not consciously registered. After pouring the hot water over the infuser, he opened a small drawer beside the stove, the one where miscellaneous utensils and kitchen tools were kept. He reached inside with his right hand and brought out something in his closed fist. His back was to her, blocking her view. She couldn't see what it was. He bent slightly over the cup, and his hand moved in a quick, subtle motion, like someone adding a pinch of salt to a dish. Then he stirred the tea with a spoon, waited for it to steep the full 5 minutes while checking his phone, and brought it to her. "Here you go, Mom." She took the cup, her hands steady despite the fear rising in her chest like water. "Thank you, sweetheart." He sat beside her on the couch, picked up the remote control, turned on the television to a home renovation show. Sarah held the cup but didn't drink. She waited until Evan was absorbed in watching a couple debate paint colors, then stood. "I'm going to finish this in my room," she said, keeping her voice normal, casual. I'm tired tonight. Okay. Sleep well. She walked upstairs slowly, went into her bedroom, closed the door, and locked it. She stood there for a moment, listening, making sure Evan hadn't followed. Then she went into the bathroom and poured the tea down the sink, watching the pale liquid spiral down the drain. She rinsed the cup thoroughly under hot water, dried it with a towel, and set it on her nightstand as if she'd finished it normally. Then she lay in bed fully dressed, her eyes open, staring at the ceiling where shadows from the tree outside moved in the breeze. For the first time in months, she didn't feel drowsy. Her mind remained sharp, alert, turning over the possibilities, arranging the evidence, reaching conclusions she didn't want to reach. By midnight, she still hadn't slept. By 2 a.m, she'd made a decision. She would find out what Evan was doing. She would document everything. She would build a case. And she would do it quietly, methodically, the way she'd approached nursing, one step at a time, checking and rechecking, leaving nothing to chance. Because her life depended on it. October arrived cool and dry, the oppressive heat finally breaking in a way that felt like mercy. The trees along Sarah's street began to turn gold and rust and deep crimson against the pale blue sky. She loved this time of year, had always loved it, the way the light slanted differently, the way the air smelled of wood smoke and dried leaves. But now every day feels like walking through fog. Not the pleasant fog of autumn mornings, but something thicker, something intentional, something created. She began keeping a log. It was a small spiral notebook she'd found in a kitchen drawer, the kind with a blue cover and narrow-rolled lines that pharmacies gave away as promotional items. On the first page, in her careful handwriting that was starting to look shaky, she wrote, "Documentation begins October 1st, 2021. Each night, after Evan gave her tea, she'd take it to her room and pour it down the bathroom sink, running the water to wash away any residue. Then she'd record the date, the time, what had happened that day, and how she felt. She noted whether her head was clear or foggy, whether she could remember things from the morning, whether the headache was present. October 1st, clear-headed. No headache. I remembered everything from today. No tea consumed. October 2nd, clear-headed. Memory sharp. Still no headache. No tea consumed. October 3rd, clear-headed. Remembered doctor's appointment, rescheduled to next week. No tea consumed. The pattern was undeniable. On the nights she avoided the tea, she woke clear-headed. Her memory sharpened day by day like a lens coming into focus. The headaches faded until they were gone completely. She began to notice details she'd missed for months, the way Evan watched her in the mornings, assessing her state, checking if she remembered things correctly. The way he'd ask pointed questions. Did you take your vitamins this morning? Did you remember to call the insurance company? Do you know what day it is? Always framed as a concern, but functioning as reconnaissance. By the second week of October, Sarah felt certain beyond any doubt. Evan was drugging her. The tea was the delivery method. But she still didn't know why. That was the missing piece, the one that would make sense of everything else. She needed proof that would convince others. Photos, documentation, evidence that couldn't be dismissed as the paranoid imaginings of a confused older woman. One afternoon while Evan was at the gym, he'd started going regularly, saying he needed to work off stress. Sarah went through his room. She felt like an intruder in her own house, a feeling she'd never experienced before. She opened his closet carefully, moving hangers quietly, checking pockets of jackets and pants hanging there. She looked under the bed with a flashlight, seeing only dust and a few cardboard boxes labeled college textbooks. She went through the desk drawers one by one, finding nothing unusual, papers related to job applications, old tax documents, a box of pens and highlighters. She checked his laptop, but it was password protected. She tried a few obvious combinations, his birthday in various formats, his father's name, combinations of letters and numbers she thought he might use, but none worked. Then she went to the kitchen. She opened every cabinet, every drawer, moving quietly, listening for the sound of his car in the driveway, ready to abandon the search if she heard the garage door. In a drawer beside the stove, the one where he'd reached that night she'd watched him prepare the tea, she found a small brown glass bottle, approximately 3 inches tall, no label, filled with white powder. Sarah's breath caught. Her hands shook as she picked it up. She unscrewed the cap carefully, touched the powder with the tip of her finger, and brought it close to her nose. It was odorless, or nearly so, perhaps a faint chemical smell, but nothing distinctive. She didn't taste it. She learned in nursing school never to taste an unknown substance. She took her phone from her pocket and photographed the bottle from multiple angles, the front, the back, the powder inside. She made sure the photos were sharp, well-lit, clearly showing the lack of labeling. Then she replaced the bottle exactly as she'd found it, making sure it was in the same position, at the same angle. She closed the drawer carefully and went upstairs. In her bedroom, she transferred the photos to her laptop, created a new folder labeled Garden Photos to avoid suspicion, and saved them there. Then she copied everything to a flash drive she kept in a jewelry box in her closet, hidden beneath a tangle of necklaces she never wore anymore. That night, Evan made tea. Sarah accepted it with the same smile she always gave him, thanked him, took it to her room, poured it out. She recorded the incident in her notebook. October 14th, 9:15 p.m., tea prepared and delivered, not consumed. By mid-October, she'd documented 7 consecutive nights. 7 cups of tea. 7 opportunities for poisoning that she'd avoided. She felt stronger each day, clearer, more like herself than she had in months. But she needed more than photos of a suspicious powder. She needed proof of what the substance was. She needed proof that it was in her system. She needed proof that it was harmful. She called an old colleague from the hospital, Dr. Nina Reyes, who worked in the toxicology lab. They'd been friends for years, had attended each other's children's graduations, shared countless overnight shifts together during the years when the hospital was perpetually understaffed. Nina was smart, discreet, and trustworthy. "Nina, I need a favor." "Anything, Sarah." "What's going on?" Nina's voice was warm, concerned in the way of old friends who know when something is wrong. "I need a blood test." Discreet. Off the record. There was a pause on the line. Sarah could imagine Nina's face, her dark eyes narrowing in thought. "Sarah, what's going on? Are you in some kind of trouble?" "I can't explain right now. But I need you to trust me. Can you do this?" Another pause, longer this time. Then, "Come to the lab on Thursday afternoon. Late, around 4:30. Most people will be gone by then. I'll run it myself." "Thank you." "Sarah, I know. I'll explain everything soon. I promise." Sarah went on Thursday when Evan thought she was going grocery shopping. She drove to the hospital, a route she'd driven thousands of times over 32 years, and parked in the visitor lot instead of the employee lot she'd once used. She entered through the side entrance Nina had specified, the one near the loading dock that few people used. The lab was in the basement, at the end of a long corridor lined with flickering fluorescent lights, smelling of disinfectant and something vaguely chemical. Nina met her at the door, already wearing gloves, her expression serious. "Sit." Sarah sat in a chair by the counter. Nina drew blood, 2 vials, one purple-topped and one red, labeled them with coded numbers instead of Sarah's name, and placed them in a refrigerated tray marked priority. "What am I looking for?" "Benzodiazepines. Sedatives. Anything that would cause memory loss, drowsiness, confusion, cognitive impairment." Nina's expression hardened, her jaw setting in the way it did when she was angry but controlling it. "Who's dosing you, Sarah?" "I can't say yet. Not until I know for certain." "Sarah. Please, Nina. Just run the test. I'll tell you everything when I can." "I promise." Nina nodded slowly, her dark eyes searching Sarah's face. "I'll have results in 3 days. Maybe sooner." Sarah left the hospital feeling lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter because she was taking action, moving forward, building her case. Heavier because she knew what the results would confirm, and once they were confirmed, she'd have to acknowledge the full truth of what was happening. 3 days later, on a Sunday afternoon while Evan was out, Another job interview. Supposedly, Nina called Sarah's cell phone. I have your results. Sarah's mouth went dry. She sat down on the couch, gripping the phone. And? Benzodiazepines. Specifically, diazepam. Trace amounts, but the pattern is consistent with low-dose daily exposure over an extended period. Sarah, this is serious. Prolonged use at these levels would cause exactly what you described: memory problems, confusion, drowsiness, difficulty concentrating. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling something inside her break and resolve at the same time. You're absolutely sure? I'm sure. I ran the test twice to confirm. Sarah, you need to tell me what's happening. Are you in danger? Not immediate danger. Not anymore. I know what's happening now. What do you need from me? Can you print the results? Something official that shows the date and the findings. I'll put them in an envelope. Sealed. Can you come by tomorrow? Yes. Thank you, Nina. For everything. Be careful, Sarah. Whatever this is, be careful. Sarah retrieved the envelope the next day, Monday afternoon, timing her visit for when Evan had another interview scheduled. The envelope was sealed with tape, marked with only a date and a reference number, no name, no identifying information that would compromise Nina if questions were asked later. Sarah took it home, placed it in the same jewelry box with the flash drive, and locked it. Now she had proof. Blood evidence showing she'd been drugged. Photos of an unlabeled bottle containing suspicious powder. Dates and times meticulously recorded. A pattern of behavior documented over weeks. But she still didn't know why. That was the piece that would make everything else make sense, that would provide motive, that would transform this from a strange situation into something prosecutable. That night, after Evan had gone to his room and closed the door, Sarah sat at the kitchen table and opened her laptop. She accessed her bank accounts, checking, savings, retirement, logging in with passwords only she knew. Everything looked normal. No unusual withdrawals, no missing funds, no transfers she didn't recognize. She checked her credit report through one of the free services. Clean. Nothing out of the ordinary. She logged into her email, searching for anything related to insurance, legal documents, financial changes, estate planning. Nothing. She was about to close the laptop when she noticed a piece of mail on the counter, a thick white envelope with her name on it, addressed from something called Lone Star Mutual Insurance Company. The return address was local, Fort Worth. She didn't recognize the company name. She'd had the same insurance company for 20 years, and it wasn't Lone Star Mutual. Sarah picked up the envelope. The flap had been opened, not torn but carefully unsealed, then pressed closed again. Someone had read it already. She pulled out the contents, a letter on official letterhead, several pages stapled together, and what looked like a policy document. Dear Mrs. Sarah Callan, congratulations on the approval of your life insurance policy with Lone Star Mutual Insurance Company. Your coverage amount of $2 million has been finalized and is now active. The policy details are attached for your review. Primary beneficiary, Evan Michael Callan, son, relationship, son benefit amount, $2 million, $2,000,000,000,000. Please review the attached documents for accuracy and keep them in a safe place. Should you have any questions, please contact our customer service department. Sarah's vision blurred. She read the letter twice, then 3 times, then 4, each word sinking in deeper. $2 million. Evan as beneficiary. A policy she had no memory of applying for. She flipped through the attached pages with hands that had started shaking again. Policy details listing coverage terms, exclusions, conditions. Premium payment schedule showing automatic deductions from her bank account starting in June. She'd have to check her statements, but she'd been too confused to review them carefully for months. Terms and conditions in dense legal language. And on the final page, a signature line. Her signature was there. Or what was supposed to be her signature. Except it wasn't. Sarah stared at it, comparing it mentally to her actual signature, the one she'd been writing for 54 years. It looked similar, same general shape, same first letter, S, with its characteristic loop, same trailing end that tapered to a point. But the slant was wrong, tilted too far to the right. The pressure was uneven, some letters darker than others. The flow was choppy, not smooth. It looked like someone had traced it, practiced it, forged it. Sarah set the papers down carefully on the kitchen table. Her hands were steady now, her mind crystalline clear. Everything made sense. Every piece fit together with terrible precision. Evan had moved home not because he'd lost his job. Maybe that was true, maybe it wasn't, but it didn't matter. He'd moved home because he needed access. Access to her mail, her daily routines, her signatures on documents that arrived regularly. He drugged her to keep her confused, compliant, unable to notice the changes happening around her, unable to question or resist. He'd forged her signature on a life insurance policy worth $2 million, named himself beneficiary, and now he was slowly increasing the dosage or maintaining it, waiting for the moment when her body would fail from the cumulative effects. Waiting for her to die. Waiting to collect. Sarah stood and walked to the window. The street was dark now, the neighbors' houses glowing with warm interior light. Somewhere a dog barked. A car passed, its headlights sweeping briefly across her living room wall before disappearing. The world looked normal, unchanged, as if nothing extraordinary were happening. As if a son weren't trying to kill his mother for money. She thought about calling the police. Picking up her phone right now and dialing 911. But what would she say? My son might be trying to kill me? She had circumstantial evidence, photos of an unlabeled powder, a blood test showing drugs in her system, a forged signature on an insurance policy. But would it be enough? Enough to convince police officers, a prosecutor, a judge? And if they investigated, if they questioned Evan, what would he say? That his mother was confused, forgetful, paranoid, imagining things. That she'd been declining for months, showing signs of dementia or mental illness. That he was just trying to help, trying to take care of her, trying to be a good son. He'd probably show them documentation of all the ways he'd been helping, paying her bills, scheduling her appointments, managing her medications. He'd paint a picture of a confused older woman making false accusations against the child who was trying to save her. No, the police wouldn't believe her. Not yet. Not without more. She needed undeniable proof. She needed documentation so clear, so comprehensive, that it couldn't be dismissed or explained away. That night, Sarah went online and spent 2 hours researching hidden cameras. She found one that met her needs: small, motion-activated, battery-powered, capable of recording up to 12 hours of footage on a memory card, priced at $23 with free shipping. She ordered it using a credit card Evan didn't know about, a rewards card she kept for emergencies, and paid for expedited shipping. It will arrive in 2 days on Thursday. When it arrived, in a plain brown box that the delivery driver left on her porch while Evan was at the gym, Sarah waited until she was alone and set it up. The camera was small enough to fit in the palm of her hand, barely larger than a matchbox. The packaging said it had night vision and motion detection. She read the instructions carefully, charged it fully, inserted a memory card, and tested it to make sure it worked. Then she waited for another day when Evan would be out. The opportunity came on Saturday morning when he had what he called a networking breakfast with former colleagues. As soon as he left, Sarah went to the kitchen and installed the camera on top of the highest cabinet, the one she needed a step stool to reach. She angled it carefully toward the counter where Evan prepared her tea each night. Then she disguised it behind a ceramic cookie jar shaped like a rooster that had been sitting up there and used for years, positioning the camera lens so it was just barely visible through the gap between the jar and the cabinet wall. Unless someone was specifically looking for it from exactly the right angle, they'd never notice it. Then she went about her day as usual, pretending nothing had changed. That evening, Evan made tea just as he always did. Sarah accepted it with her usual smile, thanked him warmly, took it to her room, poured it out, and waited. At 12:47 in the morning, unable to sleep despite her exhaustion, Sarah went downstairs as quietly as possible. The house was dark and silent. Evan's bedroom door was closed, no light showing underneath. She went to the kitchen, retrieved the camera carefully, and brought it to her bedroom. She closed and locked her door, sat at her desk, and inserted the memory card into her laptop. The video file was there, time-stamped and dated. She opened it. The footage was grainy but surprisingly clear, better than she'd hoped. The timestamp in the corner read, October 23, 2021, 11:18 p.m. The video began with an empty kitchen, just the counter and cabinets visible in the frame. Then Evan entered from the right side, moving quietly as if he didn't want to be heard. He went directly to the drawer beside the stove, the same drawer where Sarah had found the brown bottle. He pulled it out, glancing behind him toward the doorway as if checking to make sure no one was there. He unscrewed the cap and measured a small amount of white powder onto a spoon. Then he opened the tea tin that sat on the counter, the white box with handwritten labels, and poured the powder inside, shaking the tin gently to distribute it throughout the loose leaves. He returned the bottle to the drawer, washed the spoon thoroughly under running water, dried it with a kitchen towel, and placed it back in the utensil drawer. The entire process took less than 2 minutes, executed with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done it many times before. Sarah watched the video 3 times in a row, memorizing every detail, every movement. Then she exported the file, saved it to her flash drive with the other evidence, and deleted it from the camera's memory card. She reinstalled the camera in its hiding place behind the rooster cookie jar. She now had video evidence of Evan deliberately contaminating her tea with an unknown substance. She had blood evidence showing benzodiazepines in her system. She had the forged insurance policy naming him as a $2 million beneficiary. She had dates, times, and a clear pattern of behavior documented over more than 3 weeks. It was enough. It had to be enough. But what she did next would determine whether she survived this, whether she saw justice, whether Evan would go to prison or walk away free to try again with someone else. She had to be strategic. She had to be patient. She had to be smarter than he was. And she had to do it all while pretending nothing had changed. November came quietly, the trees nearly bare now, their branches black against a pale sky that looked like wet paper. Thanksgiving approached, and Sarah's neighbor Doris called to invite her to a small dinner party. "Just a few of us," Doris said on the phone, her voice warm and familiar. "You and Evan, the Millers from across the street, my niece Caroline who's visiting from Amarillo. Nothing fancy, just turkey and the usual sides. It'll be good to see you." "I feel like it's been months." Sarah agreed immediately. She hadn't seen Doris much since Evan moved in. He'd discouraged visitors, said Sarah needed rest, needed quiet, that too much social interaction would worsen her confusion, but Sarah missed her friend. Doris was 61, a retired church secretary with sharp eyes that noticed everything, a sharp mind that forgot nothing, and a sharp tongue when the situation called for it. The dinner was on Thanksgiving evening, scheduled for 6 o'clock. Sarah dressed carefully, choosing a sweater that didn't hang too loose on her frame, applying makeup for the first time in weeks to hide the pallor that Evan had commented on more than once. She looked in the mirror and barely recognized herself, thinner, older, more fragile-looking than she remembered. But her eyes were clear now, sharper than they'd been in months, and that was what mattered. Evan drove them the 3 blocks to Doris's house, insisting that Sarah shouldn't drive at night, that her reflexes weren't what they used to be. He parked on the street and walked beside her up the front path, his hand hovering near her elbow as if ready to catch her if she stumbled. Doris opened the door before they reached it, her face brightening with genuine pleasure. "Sarah, come in, come in. It's so good to see you." The house smelled exactly as Sarah remembered, roasted turkey and cinnamon, with underlying notes of whatever candles Doris burned year-round. A fire crackled in the fireplace, warming the room beyond what the temperature required. The Millers were already there, seated on the couch with glasses of wine, Jim in his usual cardigan and Margaret in a festive orange sweater. Doris's niece Caroline, a woman in her 30s with red hair and an easy laugh, stood in the kitchen doorway wearing an apron. They ate at a long table in the dining room that could comfortably seat 8. Sarah sat between Doris and Evan, across from the Millers. The food was excellent, traditional Thanksgiving fare prepared with care, but Sarah found herself picking at it, her appetite still diminished despite feeling clear-headed. She sipped water, participated in conversation about the weather and holiday plans, and felt Evan's gaze on her throughout the meal, assessing how much she ate, how engaged she was in conversation, whether she seemed confused or forgetful. Doris noticed too. Halfway through dessert, pumpkin pie with real whipped cream, she leaned close to Sarah and said quietly enough that only Sarah could hear, "You look pale, honey. Are you feeling okay?" Sarah smiled, keeping her voice equally low. "Just tired." "You've lost weight." "A lot of weight." "A little, maybe." Doris glanced across the table at Evan, then back at Sarah, her eyes narrowing slightly in a way Sarah recognized from years of friendship. "Are you sure you're all right?" Before Sarah could answer, Evan interjected smoothly, his voice carrying the perfect note of concerned but not worried. "She's been forgetful lately. Missing appointments, that kind of thing. We think it might be stress-related, maybe early signs of something we should get checked out." Doris's eyes narrowed further. "Forgetful how?" "Doctor's appointments mostly," Evan continued, still in that smooth, reasonable tone. "We're keeping an eye on it. Making sure she takes her medications, gets enough rest." Sarah said nothing. She felt Doris's hand on her arm, a gentle squeeze that communicated volumes without words. After dinner, while Evan was outside on the patio talking to Jim Miller about car maintenance and the best place to get tires replaced, Doris pulled Sarah aside in the hallway near the bathroom. "What's really going on?" Sarah hesitated. She wanted desperately to tell Doris everything: the tea, the drugs, the forged policy, the camera footage, all of it. But she couldn't. Not yet. If word got back to Evan somehow, if he realized she knew, he might escalate. He might change tactics, become more careful, destroy evidence. Or worse, he might disappear, taking any chance of justice with him. Or worst of all, he might decide to act immediately, before she'd had a chance to build a complete case. "I'm fine," Sarah said softly, meeting Doris's concerned gaze. "Really? I promise." Doris didn't look convinced. Her hand reached out and took Sarah's, holding it gently. "Your hands are shaking. You've always had such steady hands. I remember watching you give injections, never a tremor." Sarah looked down and saw that Doris was right. Her hands were trembling, a fine tremor she hadn't noticed. Stress, probably. Fear. The constant effort of pretending. "If you need help," Doris said, her voice serious, "I'm 3 blocks away." 3 blocks. "You can walk here if you need to. Day or night." "I know. Thank you." They returned to the living room where everyone was gathering for coffee. The evening wound down in comfortable conversation. Around 8:30, Evan made motions about leaving, thanking Doris for the meal, helping Sarah into her coat. They drove the 3 blocks home in silence. In the car, Evan said, "Doris seems worried about you." "She's always worried. That's just how she is. Maybe you should see Dr. Mbatha after all. Get some tests done. Rule out anything serious." "Maybe." But Sarah had no intention of seeing Dr. Mbatha. Not yet. Not until she'd taken the next step in building her case, in ensuring her survival. That night, she didn't pour out the tea. Instead, she kept it. She poured it into a small glass jar she'd sterilized in boiling water and dried thoroughly, sealed it tightly with a lid, and labeled it with the date and time using a label maker she'd found in a desk drawer. Over the next week, she did the same every night. By early December, she had 7 jars of tea, all dated and time-stamped, all stored in a cardboard box in the back of her closet behind shoes she never wore. Physical evidence. Samples that could be tested. Proof that the contamination was ongoing and systematic. She also made copies of everything else. She printed the photos of the brown bottle, the video stills from the camera footage showing Evan contaminating the tea, the blood test results from Nina. She made 3 complete sets of everything, organized them carefully in manila folders, and placed each in a separate sealed envelope. She labeled them estate documents, do not destroy, to make them look legitimate if anyone found them. One set went into a safe deposit box at her bank, accessed during a trip Evan thought was for grocery shopping. One set stayed hidden in the jewelry box in her closet. One set she mailed to herself in a padded envelope, marked "Do Not Open Until January 1st, 2022, and addressed to her own house. She was building a case that would survive her if something went wrong. If Evan succeeded despite her precautions, if she ended up in a hospital or worse, the evidence would surface. It would find its way to the right people. The safe deposit box would be opened during the settlement of her estate. The sealed envelope would be questioned. The truth would come out. But Sarah didn't plan on dying. She planned on surviving. And for that, she needed to take the next step. On December 7th, a Tuesday afternoon while Evan was supposedly at a job interview, Sarah made a phone call. Her hands were steady as she dialed. She called Lone Star Mutual Insurance Company, the company listed on the forged policy. She asked to speak to someone in the fraud division. The receptionist transferred her twice, first to customer service, then to claims, before finally connecting her to the right department. Fraud investigation. This is Investigator Harris speaking. How can I help you today? Sarah's voice was calm, measured, betraying none of the fear she felt. My name is Sarah Callan. I received a life insurance policy in my name that I didn't apply for. I believe someone forged my signature. There was a pause, the sound of typing on a keyboard. Can you provide the policy number, ma'am? She read it from the document, each digit clearly enunciated. More typing. Another pause, longer this time. Mrs. Callan, I'm showing this policy in our system. It was approved in June of this year. Are you saying you didn't sign the application? I'm saying someone forged my signature. I have evidence. The tone shifted immediately, becoming more serious. Ma'am, these are very serious allegations. Do you understand what you're claiming? I understand completely. I have documentation. What kind of documentation? I have a blood test showing I was being systematically drugged with benzodiazepines. I have video footage of the person contaminating my food and drink. I have the original policy with the forged signature that doesn't match my actual signature. I have physical samples of the contaminated beverages. And I have detailed records documenting every incident over the past 4 months, including dates, times, and symptoms. Another pause, longer this time. Sarah could hear Harris's breathing change, could imagine him sitting up straighter in his chair, reaching for a pen. Mrs. Callan, I need you to send everything to this office immediately. I'll open a formal investigation. Can you do that? I can send it tomorrow. Good. And Mrs. Callan? If you believe you're in immediate danger, you should contact the police right now. Do you understand? I'm not in immediate danger. Not anymore. I've taken precautions. What kind of precautions? I know what's happening now. I'm no longer consuming contaminated food or drink. I'm documenting everything. And I'm making sure evidence exists in multiple locations in case something happens to me. Mrs. Callan, Harris's voice held a note of urgency now. Who are we talking about? Who's the person you believe forged your signature? Sarah closed her eyes. This was the moment. Once she said it, there was no taking it back. My son, Evan Callan. He's the beneficiary of the policy. A sharp intake of breath on the other end. Your son. Yes. And you're certain about these allegations? I'm certain. I have proof. Send everything to this address. He recited an address in downtown Fort Worth, a street Sarah recognized near the courthouse. Mark it confidential. Attention Investigator Harris. I'll be waiting for it. Thank you. Mrs. Callan? Be very careful. If what you're telling me is true, this is attempted murder for financial gain. That's as serious as it gets. I know. She hung up. Her hands were steady. Her mind was clear. She'd taken the next step. The next morning, while Evan was out, she didn't ask, Sarah went to the post office. She'd prepared a package the night before, copies of everything organized chronologically in a 3-ring binder, with a typed cover letter explaining the timeline in precise, factual language. She'd included the policy with the forged signature, copies of her blood test results, printed stills from the video footage, photographs of the unlabeled bottle, dates and times from her log, and a sworn statement describing everything that had happened. Signed and dated. She sent it certified mail, signature required, tracking number provided. She kept the receipt in her wallet. Then she went home, made herself lunch, a sandwich she actually had an appetite for, and waited. 2 weeks passed. December days, short and gray. Evan seemed increasingly anxious, though he tried to hide it. He checked his phone constantly, scrolling through messages and emails with a furrowed brow. He paced the house, walking from room to room without apparent purpose. He asked Sarah more questions than usual about her day, her health, whether she'd talked to anyone, whether she'd received any important mail. She answered calmly, casually, giving no indication that anything had changed. On December 20th, Evan's phone rang while he was in the shower. It was sitting on the kitchen counter, vibrating and chiming. Sarah glanced at the screen from where she sat at the table reading a magazine. The caller ID read, Lone Star Mutual Insurance. Sarah looked away immediately, returning her attention to the magazine article she wasn't actually reading. Her heart pounded. It was starting. When Evan came downstairs 15 minutes later, hair still damp, Sarah was in exactly the same position. He picked up his phone, saw the missed call, and his face went pale, actually pale, the color draining visibly. I need to run an errand, he said quickly, his voice tight. Okay, Sarah replied without looking up from the magazine. He left. He didn't come back for 3.5 hours. That night, he didn't make her tea. He said he was tired, had a headache, and needed to sleep. He went to his room early, at 8:30, and closed the door firmly. Sarah sat in the living room, listening to the silence, understanding what was happening. The investigation had begun. Harris, or someone like him, had called Evan for routine verification of the policy. Evan now knew the policy was under scrutiny. He was trying to figure out what had gone wrong, how they'd found out, what evidence they had. And he was deciding what to do next. Sarah went to bed that night fully dressed, her phone fully charged on the nightstand, the bedroom door locked from the inside with a chair wedged under the handle for extra security. She didn't sleep deeply. She lay in the dark, listening for footsteps in the hallway, for the creak of a floorboard, for the sound of her doorknob turning, for any indication that Evan had decided to act rather than run. Nothing came. The night remained silent except for the usual house sounds, the furnace cycling on and off, the ice maker in the kitchen, a car passing on the street outside. By morning, Evan was packing. December 21st was cold, the kind of cold that settles deep into your bones and stays there. Sarah woke early, just after 6, and heard sounds from Evan's room, drawers opening and closing with urgency, the scrape of hangers in the closet, the rustle of plastic bags, the thump of objects being dropped into luggage. She lay still, listening, analyzing the sounds. He was leaving. Running. Exactly as she'd anticipated. She got up, dressed in warm clothes, jeans, a sweater, thick socks, and went downstairs. She made coffee using the automatic maker, the familiar morning ritual grounding her. The house was dim, pre-dawn gray light filtering through the windows. She sat at the kitchen table and waited. Evan appeared an hour later, just after 7. He was carrying 2 duffel bags and the same cardboard box he'd arrived with 6 months earlier, the one labeled Important Documents. He set them by the front door, then came into the kitchen. His face looked drawn, exhausted, like he hadn't slept. I got a job offer, he said without preamble. In Denver. Sarah looked at him over the rim of her coffee mug, keeping her expression neutral, curious, but not suspicious. That was fast. I didn't know you'd applied anywhere in Colorado. Yeah, it's a good company. They need someone right away, so the hiring process moved quickly. When do you leave? Today. This morning. They want me to start Monday, so I need to drive out there, find a place to stay, get settled. That's very sudden, Sarah said mildly. He didn't meet her eyes, looking instead at his hands, the floor, the window. I know, but it's a good opportunity. Management position, full benefits, exactly what I've been looking for. Sarah stood slowly, rinsed her mug in the sink, dried her hands on a towel. She turned to face him, letting the silence stretch between them for several long seconds. Don't forget your thermos. Evan blinked, finally looking directly at her. What? Your thermos, Sarah repeated, her voice calm and even. The stainless steel one you keep in the cabinet. You'll need it for the long drive to Denver. It's at least 14 hours. He stared at her. Something passed between them in that moment, some unspoken understanding, some acknowledgement that couldn't be put into words. His eyes searched her face, looking for something. Evidence that she knew? Fear? Anger? But Sarah's expression remained neutral, pleasant, the face of a mother seeing her son off on a trip. Right, Evan said finally. Thanks. He went to the cabinet, the one above the coffee maker, and retrieved the silver thermos. His hands shook slightly as he placed it in one of his duffel bags. He carried his things to the car, making 2 trips. Sarah stood on the porch, arms crossed against the cold, and watched him load the trunk with mechanical efficiency. The morning was quiet, no other neighbors out yet, the street empty. Frost glittered on the grass. Evan paused before getting into the driver's seat. He looked back at her, one hand on the car door. I'll call you when I get there. Okay. And Mom? Take care of yourself. Maybe see that doctor after all. Get things checked out. Sarah said nothing. She just looked at him. Evan got in the car, started the engine, and drove away. The car disappeared around the corner, brake lights flashing once, and then he was gone. Sarah stood on the porch for another minute, feeling the cold, watching the empty street. Then she went inside, closed the door, and locked it, both the handle lock and the deadbolt. She stood in the foyer for a long moment, her back against the door, breathing slowly. She felt nothing. No relief, no sadness, no anger, no triumph. Just a cold, clear certainty that she had done what needed to be done. That she had survived. That the next phase was about to begin. That afternoon, at precisely 2:30, 2 men knocked on her door. Sarah looked through the peephole first. 2 men in plain clothes, one middle-aged with gray hair, one younger with sharp features. The older one held up a badge to the peephole. She opened the door but kept the security chain engaged. Yes, Mrs. Sarah Callan, the older man said. I'm Investigator Harris from Lone Star Mutual Insurance Company. This is Detective Ortiz with the Fort Worth Police Department. May we come in? Sarah's heart rate increased, but her hands remained steady. May I see your identification, please? Both men held up their credentials. She examined them carefully through the gap in the door, then unlatched the chain and stepped aside. They entered, looking around the living room, the kitchen, the hallway with the kind of observational sweep that professionals do automatically. Harris was in his 50s, with tired eyes that had seen too much, lines around his mouth that suggested he rarely smiled. Ortiz was younger, maybe 40, carrying a leather notebook and a pen. We'd like to ask you some questions, Harris said. Is that all right? Of course. Would you like to sit down? They sat at the kitchen table. Sarah offered coffee, which they declined. She sat across from them, her hands folded on the table in front of her, her posture straight. Harris opened a folder and spread several documents across the surface, photocopies of the forged insurance policy, copies of some of the materials Sarah had sent, official forms from his company. You filed a fraud complaint with our company. I did. And you provided substantial documentation supporting that complaint. Yes. Can you walk us through what happened? From the beginning. Take your time. Sarah did. She spoke calmly, methodically, laying out the timeline with the precision she'd learned in nursing, presenting symptoms, observed changes, diagnostic evidence, conclusions. She told them about Evan's arrival in June, about his helpfulness that seemed genuine at first. About the tea that began the second week, the memory loss that followed, the confusion, the headaches, the weight loss. About finding the unlabeled pills in the bathroom cabinet. About the discovery of the insurance policy. About the blood test and the video surveillance. About documenting everything, collecting samples, building a case. She told them everything except how it felt. She kept emotion out of her voice, her hands steady on the table, her gaze level. When she finished, Harris leaned back in his chair, his expression grim. Do you still have the video footage? I do. And the blood test results. And the tea samples. And detailed logs of dates and times. We're going to need all of it. I can provide everything right now. Ortiz made notes throughout, his pen moving rapidly across the page. When Sarah finished, he looked up. "Mrs. Callan, what you're describing is attempted murder. You understand that?" Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I understand that completely." "Your son left this morning?" Harris asked. "Yes. Around 7:30. Do you know where he went?" "He said Denver. He said he had a job offer there." "I don't know if that's true." Harris and Ortiz exchanged a glance. Ortiz stood. "We're going to need to take your official statement at the station. And we'll need all the physical evidence you've collected. Can you come with us now?" "Yes. Let me get my coat." They spent the next 4 hours at the police station. Sarah gave a recorded statement, reciting everything again in even greater detail, answering questions from both Harris and Ortiz and occasionally from other detectives who came in to listen. She handed over the flash drive with all the photos and videos. She provided the 7 sealed jars of tea samples. She gave them copies of the blood test results, though she kept Nina's name out of it, saying only that she'd had the test done at a private lab. She presented her handwritten logs with dates and times. She showed them the forged signature on the policy document and provided samples of her actual signature for comparison. She signed forms, initiated documents, authorized searches, and agreed to testify if charges were filed. When it was done, when she'd given them everything, Harris walked her to her car in the station parking lot. The sun was setting, the sky streaked with orange and pink. "We'll be in touch," he said. "This will take time. We need to locate your son, interview him, verify everything, build the case. These things don't move fast." "I understand." "And Mrs. Callan? You did the right thing. A lot of people wouldn't have. They'd have wanted to protect their family member, or they wouldn't have believed what was happening, or they'd have been too frightened. But you documented everything, built your case, and came forward. You probably saved your own life." Sarah didn't respond. She didn't think it was about right or wrong. It was about survival. About refusing to be a victim. About using the skills she had, observation, documentation, analysis, to protect herself when no one else could. She drove home as the sun set completely, darkness falling fast the way it does in winter. The house was empty now, truly empty, and it felt different. Not lonely, but still. A stillness she could control. A silence that belonged to her. That night, Sarah made herself tea for the first time in months. Real tea, from a brand she trusted, purchased that afternoon at the grocery store on the way home from the police station. She boiled water in a clean kettle, selected a chamomile tea bag from the new box, poured the water carefully, and let it steep for exactly 4 minutes. She sat on the couch with the warm cup in her hands and took a slow sip. It tasted clean, pure, exactly as tea should taste. No bitterness, no chemical undertone, no fear. She finished the entire cup, rinsed it, placed it on the drying rack, and went to bed. For the first time in 6 months, she slept without fear. Without listening for footsteps. Without wondering if she'd wake up. And when morning came, she woke naturally, clear-headed, herself. The investigation moved slowly through December and into the new year, as investigations always do. There were delays Sarah hadn't anticipated, bureaucratic hurdles, jurisdictional questions about which agencies had authority, legal procedures that had to be followed precisely. Sarah was interviewed twice more, once by a prosecutor from the district attorney's office named Amanda Landry, and once by an FBI agent who specialized in insurance fraud cases and wanted to determine if federal charges were warranted. Each time, she told the same story in the same calm voice, answering their questions with factual precision, never embellishing, never speculating, sticking only to what she'd observed and documented. Evan was found on January 9th, not in Denver but in a budget motel outside Albuquerque, New Mexico. According to Detective Ortiz, who called to inform Sarah, Evan had been there for 2 weeks, paying cash, using a false name. He'd made a mistake by using his real credit card at a gas station 15 miles away, triggering an alert in the system. Local police located him and arrested him without incident. He was extradited back to Texas 3 days later. He was charged with multiple felony counts, insurance fraud, forgery, attempted poisoning, assault with intent to cause serious bodily harm. The The bail was set at $500,000. He couldn't pay it. He remained in county jail while his public defender began preparing a defense. Sarah learned all of this through phone calls and official letters. She never went to the jail. She had no desire to see Evan, no need for closure or confrontation. She'd said everything she needed to say in her official statements. The trial was initially scheduled for June, but in April, Evan's public defender, a tired-looking man named Russell Chin, approached Prosecutor Landry with a plea deal. Sarah was called to Landry's office to discuss it. Landry's office was in the courthouse, a small room with file boxes stacked in corners and legal books lining the walls. She was in her mid-40s, with short dark hair and a no-nonsense demeanor that reminded Sarah of her best nursing supervisors. He wants to plead guilty to fraud and assault in exchange for a reduced sentence, Landry explained, sitting across her desk from Sarah. The attempted murder charge would be dropped. What sentence? 8 to 12 years, eligible for parole after 6. Sarah considered this, thinking through the implications. And if we go to trial, we'll push for 20 years, possibly more. But there's risk. Juries are unpredictable, especially in family cases. They sometimes have trouble believing that a son would try to kill his mother for money. Defense attorneys are good at creating reasonable doubt, at suggesting alternative explanations. And your son will likely testify, probably claim he was just trying to help you, that you misunderstood his intentions, that you're suffering from paranoia or dementia. He'd be lying. I know that. You know that. But convincing 12 strangers beyond a reasonable doubt is a different matter. With a plea, we guarantee a conviction and significant prison time. It's a sure thing. Sarah thought about it. She thought about sitting in a courtroom for weeks, listening to Evan's lawyer paint her as a confused, paranoid woman who'd imagined everything. She thought about reliving every detail in front of strangers, about having her mental state questioned, about the possibility that despite all her evidence, a jury might not believe her. "I'll accept the plea," Sarah said finally. Landry nodded, as if this was what she'd expected. "Smart decision. You'll get justice, and we avoid the trauma and uncertainty of trial." The plea was entered in early May. Sarah attended that hearing, sitting in the back of a courtroom that smelled of floor polish and old wood. She watched as Evan was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed in front of him, his face pale and expressionless. He stood beside Russell Chin while the judge read the charges and the terms of the plea agreement. "Mr. Callan, you're pleading guilty to 1 count of insurance fraud, 1 count of forgery, and 1 count of assault with intent to cause serious bodily harm. Do you understand these charges?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And you understand that by entering this plea, you're waiving your right to trial?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Has anyone forced you or coerced you into entering this plea?" "No, Your Honor." "How do you plead?" "Guilty, Your Honor." The judge accepted the plea. Sentencing was set for June 15th. Evan didn't look at Sarah. Not once during the entire proceeding. She sat in the back row, her hands folded in her lap, watching him with no expression on her face. When it was over, when he was led away by bailiffs, she stood and walked out. No one stopped her. No reporters waited in the hallway. This wasn't that kind of case. Too quiet, too domestic, too common in its horror to warrant media attention. She drove home, ate lunch at her kitchen table, and spent the afternoon working in her small yard, pulling weeds that had grown unchecked over the winter. The sentencing hearing came in mid-June. Again, Sarah attended, again sitting in the back. This time, Evan was allowed to make a statement. He stood before the judge, still in orange, and spoke in a voice Sarah barely recognized. "I never meant to hurt anyone. I was desperate, financially drowning, and I made terrible decisions. I know there's no excuse. I'll accept whatever punishment the court determines is appropriate." The judge was unmoved. She sentenced him to 10 years in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, with eligibility for parole after 7 years. She also ordered restitution in the amount of $2,300 to cover the fraudulent insurance policy and associated costs. Sarah received a check for that amount 6 weeks later. She looked at it for a long time, holding the piece of paper with her name and an amount that seemed simultaneously too much and too little. Then she placed it in an envelope, sealed it, and put it in a desk drawer. She never cashed it. Some things, she decided, you don't redeem. By July, Sarah had made a decision. She was leaving Fort Worth. The house held too much, too many memories of Richard and their life together, too many months of fear and confusion under Evan's careful manipulation, too many nights pouring tea down the sink while pretending everything was fine. She needed a fresh start, a place where no one knew what had happened, where she could walk through a grocery store without wondering if people recognized her from the few local news articles that had eventually covered the case. She found a small house in Abilene, about 3 hours west. 2 bedrooms, 1.5 bathrooms, a screened porch perfect for sitting in the evenings, a yard with enough space for a proper garden. It was smaller than the Fort Worth house, simpler, but that's what she wanted. Simplicity. Space. Peace. She packed methodically over the course of 2 weeks, sorting through decades of accumulated belongings. Some things she donated to charity, old furniture that was too big for the new place, kitchen appliances she'd never really needed, boxes of books she'd never read again. Some things she kept, photographs carefully selected, a few pieces of jewelry that Richard had given her, the nursing textbooks she couldn't bear to part with, the flash drive hidden in the jewelry box with all the evidence from those terrible months. She left the tea tin behind. She left it sitting on the kitchen counter for the new owners to find, a ceramic container with a handwritten label that said relaxation blend. Let them use it for their own tea, unsuspecting and innocent. The moving truck came on August 1st. Sarah supervised the loading, checking items off on a list, making sure nothing was forgotten. Then she cleaned the house one final time, sweeping and mopping and wiping down counters. She stood in the empty living room and looked around at the space that had contained her life for so many years, her marriage, her widowhood, her near death at her son's hands. Then she locked the door and drove away. The new house in Abilene was waiting. It was quiet, sun-filled, surrounded by native grasses and wildflowers that thrived in the West Texas climate. She spent the first week unpacking, arranging furniture, and hanging pictures. She planted herbs in terracotta pots on the screened porch, basil, thyme, rosemary, mint. She signed up to volunteer twice a week at a hospice center on the north side of town, reading to patients, helping with small tasks, bringing the same calm presence she'd always carried into rooms where people needed it most. She made a few friends slowly, other women her age, retirees and widows who attended the same church she started visiting. She joined a book club that met on Tuesday evenings in the back room of a local bookstore. She took long walks in the mornings before the heat became oppressive, following trails that wound through parks and past the lake, watching the sky turn from gray to gold to blue. She didn't talk about Evan. When new acquaintances asked if she had children, she gave the answer she'd practiced, a son. "We're not in touch," her tone made it clear the subject was closed, and people respected that. No one pressed for details. One afternoon in September, almost exactly a year after the initial discovery of the insurance policy, Sarah received a letter. It was postmarked from a Texas Department of Criminal Justice facility in East Texas. She recognized the handwriting on the envelope, Evan's neat, careful script that she'd seen countless times on birthday cards and Christmas letters. She didn't open it. She stood by the mailbox for a long moment, turning the envelope over in her hands, feeling the weight of it 2 or 3 pages, probably, folded inside. An explanation? An apology? More manipulation. She walked to the small fireplace in her living room, rarely used in the brutal Texas summers, but functional. She placed the letter inside on top of the grate, struck a match from the box she kept on the mantel, and lit the corner of the envelope. The paper curled immediately, blackening and smoking. The fire consumed it quickly, turning the envelope and whatever words it contained to ash. She watched until nothing remained but black fragments and a faint smell of burnt paper. Then she swept the ashes into a small metal pail, carried it outside, and scattered them in the yard beneath the mesquite trees. She went inside, washed her hands thoroughly with soap and hot water, and made herself tea. She chose chamomile, her favorite. She boiled water in a clean kettle, poured it carefully over the tea bag, let it steep for exactly 4 minutes while she stood at the counter and watched the color deepen. She added a small spoon of honey, stirred it clockwise 3 times, carried the cup to the screened porch. She sat in a wicker chair and watched the afternoon light filter through the mesquite trees, creating patterns of shadow and gold on the wooden floor. The tea tasted exactly as it should, clean, slightly sweet, with the floral notes of chamomile and the earthiness of honey. She finished the cup slowly, savoring each sip. She rinsed it carefully in the kitchen sink, dried it with a clean towel, and set it on the counter. And she felt, for the first time in over a year, something close to peace. By the fall of 2025, Sarah's life had found a rhythm that felt right. She woke early every morning, always before dawn, and sat on the screened porch with coffee, watching the sky lighten from black to gray to pink to blue. She tended her herb garden, which had expanded to include lavender, sage, and more chamomile than she could use. She read books, mysteries mostly, the kind with quiet protagonists who solved problems through observation and patience rather than violence. She thought about Evan sometimes, but not often. When she did, it was with a strange detachment, as if he were a character in a story she'd read long ago, someone whose actions she could analyze clinically but no longer felt connected to emotionally. She didn't hate him. Hate required energy she preferred to direct elsewhere. She didn't forgive him either. Forgiveness felt like a false concept here, something people said you should do, but that had no real meaning in her situation. She simply held the truth of what had happened, acknowledged it without dwelling on it, and moved forward. One evening in October, Doris called. Sarah was surprised to see the name on her phone. They'd texted occasionally, but hadn't spoken directly in months. "Sarah, I've been thinking about you." "I'm doing well, Doris. Thank you for calling. I'm glad to hear that. You sound different. Lighter, somehow. More like yourself." "I feel more like myself." They talked for a while about safe topics, the weather, which was cooling finally after a brutally hot summer, Doris's niece Caroline, who was getting married in November, a new restaurant that had opened in Fort Worth that served the best barbecue Doris had ever eaten. Then Doris's tone shifted slightly, becoming more careful. "I never asked what happened with Evan. After Thanksgiving, I heard he'd moved away suddenly, and then you moved, and I didn't want to pry. But I've always wondered." Sarah paused, looking out at her small yard where the light was fading into dusk. "He made some very poor decisions. We're not in contact now." "I'm sorry, Sarah." "Don't be. I'm okay. Better than okay, actually. I'm good." And she meant it. She could hear the truth in her own voice, the absence of false brightness or defensive assurance. She was good. She was herself again. "Well, if you ever want to talk about it," Doris let the offer hang in the air. "I appreciate that. Maybe someday." After they hung up, Sarah sat on the porch and watched the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. The air was cool, pleasant, carrying the scent of dry grass and the faint promise of rain that probably wouldn't come. She thought about the woman she'd been a year ago, confused, frightened, unsure if she'd survive the next month. She thought about the woman she was now, steady, clear-eyed, in control of her own life and her own choices. She'd survived by refusing to be a victim, by documenting instead of despairing, by building a case instead of collapsing, by staying calm when everything inside her wanted to scream, by recognizing the signs early enough to act, by trusting her instincts even when they led to terrible conclusions about someone she loved. It hadn't been heroic in the way stories usually portrayed heroism. There had been no dramatic confrontation, no moment of public vindication, no satisfying speech about justice. It had been methodical, clinical. The same approach she'd taken to nursing for 32 years: assess the situation, gather the data, formulate a plan, execute it step by step, document everything. And it worked. She'd survived. She'd seen justice done, even if the sentence felt insufficient. She'd reclaimed her life. Sarah went inside as full darkness fell. She locked the door, both locks, always, and made herself tea. She'd come to love this evening ritual again, the simple act of choosing her tea, boiling water, waiting for it to steep, carrying the warm cup to her favorite chair. She poured carefully, watching the steam rise in thin columns. She brought the cup to her lips and drank slowly. She thought briefly about forgiveness. She'd heard people say that forgiveness was about letting go, releasing the anger, freeing yourself from the person who hurt you. But Sarah didn't think that was quite right. Anger wasn't something she'd carried much of anyway. She'd been too focused on survival to waste energy on anger. Forgiveness, she decided as she sipped her tea, it wasn't about letting go. It was about knowing when to stop pouring, when to seal the kettle, when to turn off the flame, when to walk away from the table and clean up the mess. She finished her tea, rinsed the cup thoroughly, and placed it upside down on the drying rack, the same position she'd always used, the same habit she'd developed as a young nurse learning proper hygiene protocols. Outside, the night had settled in, quiet and cool. Inside, the house was still. Not the heavy, oppressive stillness of those months when Evan lived here and she'd felt watched even in her own home. This was a different stillness, peaceful, chosen, hers. She turned off the lights one by one: kitchen, living room, hallway. She climbed the stairs to her bedroom, changed into the soft cotton pajamas she preferred, brushed her teeth thoroughly for exactly 2 minutes, washed her face with warm water and gentle soap. She slipped under the covers, arranged the pillows the way she liked them, and reached for the book on her nightstand, a mystery set in Scotland. She was halfway through. The window was open slightly, and she could hear the sounds of evening crickets, the rustle of leaves in the mesquite trees, the distant call of an owl hunting in the darkness. She read for 20 minutes, then marked her place and turned off the light. She didn't dream. Or if she did, she didn't remember them. And when she woke the next morning, the sun was already rising, golden and warm, flooding her bedroom with light that felt clean and new. She got up immediately, not lingering in bed the way she used to. She made coffee in the quiet kitchen. She carried her cup outside to the screened porch and sat in her favorite wicker chair. Another day. Another choice to keep going. Another choice to keep living. Another cup poured by her own hand, controlled by her own judgment, consumed with full awareness and presence. The steam rose from her coffee cup, visible in the cool morning air, then faded. The sun continued to rise. Birds began their morning songs. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Sarah sipped her coffee and watched the day begin. And that, she thought, was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Every story here will stir your soul. Welcome to Spice and Sugar, your daily escape into real emotions, bold lives, and unforgettable lessons. Here, it's all about love, loss, laughter, and the quiet strength that carries us through. I share stories that make you feel, that remind you you're not alone, that every bitter moment can lead to something sweet. If you want to laugh, cry, and see life through stories that heal and inspire, subscribe and stay a while.